Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today, we have the most special of guests, Dr. Mylon Kemp. He is a clinical psychology PhD at the University of Kansas and is also the residential best friend of mine. How are you doing today?
Hey. Uh, for clarification, not a doctor, but you got to call it to be it, right? So that's
Exactly.
a great call. One will be in about 4 or 5 years. Might as well start saying it now. You got to manifest it. Happy to be here, man. This is a big thing, and give you a little bit of kudos and shout out. You've been doing this for a while, and I've been able to recognize your progress and how hard you've worked on this podcast and everything you've built to everybody who listens. So just to shout out all your hard work and how much you've done to build this Reeducated, man. It's honestly quite impressive. You should be very proud of yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, I mean it's we're reaching 75, which I'm excited. I'm working on designing a new logo. So
Wow.
kind of for the 75th anniversary, 75th episode. So, but I'm just really excited for today's conversation because, we've had this really heavy season of talking about, race from so many different perspectives. We're about 13 episodes in. And I feel like I'm really excited to close it off with this conversation with you because we get to move away from the theory and actually talk about our own kind of personal experiences being colored in the US and kind of figuring out what it means to love our skin, to love ourselves, what it means to be Indian or Black or American, and to kind of have these questions that were put onto us our whole lives and to now actually speak about our practical experiences. So I'm really excited to get into today. But, I think you in specific are really interesting to have this conversation with because I have never met somebody who has more intimate knowledge of so many different types of people. I mean, you grew up for part of your life around a lot of, predominantly Black neighborhood, and then you grew up in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, and then you went to a school and you had a lot of friends who were Indian, and you're dating a Filipino woman, and then you moved to Kansas, and you've been able to experience race through so many different perspectives. I feel like it is something that in being mixed yourself, and I feel like it's something that you've had to think about a lot. And so I'm really excited to kind of get into your own perspectives. But I guess my first question for you, which I'll start with the hardest one, just because why give you an easy ball?
Great.
But it is to understand, this concept of being mixed. What has that been like for you? What has been your relationship in figuring out what it means to be Black for yourself?
Hmm. Well, I'll start off by um, highlighting that I am half Black. My dad is Black, and my mom is Romanian. So she's from Romania. And there's a very interesting distinction that people always make between are you mixed with a Black mom or mixed with a white mom? Because people say it's
Hmm.
different. But the interesting thing for me is growing up, my mom wasn't around for a lot of my childhood, particular parts. And I lived with a woman who babysat me, and she was Black, is Black. And so in some ways, for a certain amount of years, I also did get the experience of having a Black mom in a certain type of sense. So yeah, man, I've just had a very interesting, eclectic, multifaceted upbringing of races and cultures. And so what it means to be mixed, man, is so interesting. And I can speak about it from the perspective of my experiences, which is you never feel like you belong to anything. And I've always sort of felt like the only people I actually relate to are other mixed people because so much of what a race is a relation of experience. So much of what it means to be Black
Mm.
is your ability to experience the experiences of Black people, which sounds very circular, but in the sense of if your skin looks a certain particular type of way, if you know what the gumbo smells like cooking in the kitchen, if you know what, it's like to fucking dance the electric slide or whatever, so much of these experiences come together to create what it means to be Black. And I think that applies with most races and cultures. It's the relationship to the experience. And so really mixed people are different, and particularly mixed black and white people are very different from black people and white people in the sense of we get both and neither. And it's a very interesting thing. You're never getting the full experience of what it's like to be a black person. You're never treated as badly as black people are by white people, and you're never treated as familial as black people treat another, as a black person treats another black person. And similarly, you're never treated like a white person. You never get the benefits of being a white person, but you're also not treated as bad as a not white person in that sense. Um, and of course, you are more on the spectrum of being black than anything else, especially by how you are seen by the public. But it is very different. And truthfully, the only experiences makes people have a very unique experience of feeling disconnected from both sides. And the only people who they can relate to with that are other mixed people in the sense of creating a emergent property of the two races that in my eyes honestly creates another type of race in a sense. It creates a different type of culture, it creates a different type of understanding of what it means to be a race. And so it's very interesting because there's always this question. Everybody always asks this question. How mixed do you got to be to say the N word? And it's a really, really interesting question if you really want to get into it. I feel like there was so much controversy with this, with the whole Kendrick Lamar, Drake sort of rap battle that just happened. If you live under a rock, in his song Euphoria, Kendrick Lamar tells Drake that he doesn't want to hear him say the N word anymore. And it stirred up a lot of controversy because Kendrick Lamar's wife's also mixed and Drake is mixed. So pretty much the question became, is he saying mixed people shouldn't say the N word? A lot of what people alluded to was he's not saying mixed people as a whole shouldn't say the N word. He's saying that mixed people who are not truly um, modeling and truly being a part of Black culture, who are just kind of using it to their benefit, who are just kind of, switching in and out of being Black when they want to, and not really homaging or respecting the race
Mm,
saying it. Um, Even that is very questionable. There is a whole section of Black people, especially on Twitter, who say that mixed people shouldn't say the N word. They are not Black. They shouldn't say the N word. So there's this whole debate, even within Blackness, that is, are mixed people Black? And I think the hard part is that when you're a mixed person, you are constantly trying to appease everyone. The people you're trying to appease the most are Black people because that's what society tells you are. But it's also, those are the very people who will tell you that you're not Black. And so in a sense, being mixed is inherently traumatic. It's inherently a dissociative identity. You inherently do not know who you are. You are split in your understanding of what it means to be a person. And so something that I've heard coined, I don't know if the DSM coins it, I doubt it, but mixed identity disorder is something I've heard talked about. And maybe it's more of a syndrome, I don't know, but there is in essence a pain of understanding who you are, a lack of foundation that you can build upon when you try to figure out what does it mean to be me. And so many races truly have the pleasure of having a rich history that they can look back on. And Black people have had that taken from them, but they at least have some Southern roots that they can track back to. Mixed people don't have anything they can track back to. We don't have any ties to any particular culture or race. Mixed people don't have a culture. We don't have our own. So, in understanding what it means to belong, the only thing you can use as a mixed person are pieces broken up from each side to put yourself together. And those pieces all individually tell you don't belong. So you're using individual pieces of brokenness to put together a picture of wholeness that tells you who you are. It's like a mosaic. And some people see mosaics as one beautiful painting, and other people see it as a bunch of broken pieces. But mixed people's identity is in its essence a mosaic of understanding.
mm. Wow, beautifully said. I feel like I relate. I'm trying to. Parts of me feel like I relate to what you're saying a lot. In that, I think for a lot of immigrants, figuring out that balance of what does it mean to be, for me at least, being Indian versus what does it mean to be American, causes this same form of disassociation with both sides. And when you were talking, I was thinking about this because when I spent my time in India, one of the the most beautiful thing that I got to experience was this sense of safety because I was like, I'm finally around, I'm living in a place where everyone else looks like me. I no longer look like I'm different. I no longer feel like I'm different. I feel like I am also Indian. And I feel like growing up in the US, we're one of the first few countries who've had this kind of experiment over the last 100 or 200 years where everybody looks different. Everyone from near you looks different. So you no longer have this sense of like, okay, I am one of everyone else, whether it's ethnically, racially, or now even geographically. And so one thing I'm curious about is when you talk about this mixed identity disorder, what are some of the things that come with it? What are some of the kind of experiences of people who may feel that?
You know, I think one really great example of this, honestly, comes from the Kendrick Lamar and Drake
Mm.
beef, which I think Drake really, really well represents what mixed identity disorder looks like. A lot of
Mm.
people call Drake a culture vulture because they say that he's stealing from different cultures. That's a consequence of not having your own. That's a consequence of really not having anywhere you belong. So many people underscore the negative effects of not feeling like you belong. Belonging is so central to so many important adaptive functions psychologically. Belonging is important for a sense of identity. Belonging is important for a sense of self-love. Belonging is important for a sense of confidence, for courage. There's a researcher named Brene Brown who does a lot of research on belonging, and she talks about this distinction between fitting in and belonging. And she says
Wow.
fitting in is trying to change yourself so that you can mesh with groups around you. And belonging is believing that you're accepted for who you are. And mixed people are inherently trying to fit in everywhere they go. And she says belonging is integral for self love. If you do not think you belong, you cannot really love yourself. And fitting in is commensurate with a sense of imposter syndrome, with a sense of um, constantly trying to be perfect. Um, and so I think when you look at Drake, what does he do? He always has different accents. He's hanging out in this culture and he's hanging out in that culture. He's always speaking in different voices. Some people say one day he's acting black, the next day he's not. What you're seeing in Drake is a schism of identity. You're seeing him flow in between these different states of understanding who he is. And I'm sure when the question gets asked to Drake of really what you are, there's not really a clear answer. And I think it has, benefits and negatives in the sense of you can get to wear all these different hats. And it's really, really beautiful in the sense. But it's sort of like being a traveler without having a home. In one degree, that's
Mm.
but in the other degree, you don't really feel like you have a home. And even amongst other mixed people, because everyone is trying to appease where we believe we should belong, which is blackness, there's always a sort of inherent, there's not a genuine understanding of like, hey, you're mixed and I'm mixed. It's sort of like, well, who's blacker? Who actually belongs here? Who's got, the more of the black scent? Who's got more of the slang? Whose upbringing was, more hood? Who's likes rap more? Who likes basketball more? There's this inherent almost competition of who is actually blacker. And it's both of us, in a sense, saying how much of your identity can I discredit and how much of my identity can I credit through our experiences. And so, yeah, man, some of the symptoms I think are an inherent anxiousness and an inherent identity disconfiguration where, something I say really often is like, I don't really know how I sound because I change so often depending on my environment. People talk about code switching for sure, but what happens when you code switch so often that you forget which one's your actual way of understanding? You
Wow.
do not have a stable sense of identity that progresses through time. Therefore, you become a chameleon. You change everywhere you go. You try to adapt to fit in everywhere you go. You're doing things that you don't even know why you're doing them. You just don't have a locus of understanding of who you are. You're just a bunch of fragments that you exist in depending on the space you're in.
I don't normally say these to my guests because I have to kind of also code switch and be the podcaster, but you are spitting some fire right now. Like, I mean, man, it's great. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, Mylon went on a hike before recording this podcast. If you're ever about to get recorded for something, go on a hike. That is what I'm learning from today. Wow. Yes. Wow. I mean, I'm just writing all these notes down. I'm like, I don't even know where to begin for the next part. But this inherent anxiousness, I mean, I think, and you've experienced this every time you come to the Bay Area, and it's a really interesting place because I think Black culture plays such a prevalent role in the way that we all grew up. I have this one really distinct memory where I remember asking a friend of mine in the sixth grade, and I had asked him, if you could be any race, what would you be? Which, first of all, is a fascinating question. If you think about it, like why a kid would even be driven to ask such a question. First of all, that in itself is fascinating.
Very
And he said black, right? And I for some reason my memory has that so kind of imprinted on my brain. And I remember for long periods of my life I wanted to be black, and then there was a period of my life I really wanted to be white. And your kind of definition of race being a relation of experience, I think is really, really profound, which it makes it make a lot more sense. And and so throughout that entire time, you have this inherent anxiousness, which is like, I don't really know who I am. I don't really know what it is that I would do. And your differentiation between fitting in and belonging is phenomenal because you're always trying to say, I mean, if you just talk to many Indian boys in the Bay Area, you will see there is this desire to make their life fit in more to the kind of expectations of what it would be like to be black. So you make it seem like you had a harder life. You make it seem like you're really from some challenging background, just to kind of like play on the role of like what you would assume is what the experience that you should be coming from to be able to take on such an identity. One of my questions for you is you talked about this sense of belonging. I was curious just to hear your personal experience of if you had to think back to a time in your life, when would you say you felt that you belonged the most? And what was it about that environment that brought that feeling out?
absolutely. I want to comment on one thing before that I just kind of sort of thought of while you were thinking or while you were speaking. Which is that another sort of way that it affects you is if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and whether or not that's a inherently valid measure, very debatable, but it at least gives us a heuristic of understanding how um, psychological needs work, from the baseline being, psychological needs up to, self-transcendence. But the third rung of that hierarchy is belonging. And belonging, very understandably so, is the prerequisite for self-esteem in the hierarchy. And I think that actually makes a lot of intuitive sense. And so if you think about what this constantly trying to fit in does, is it creates an inherently low level of self-esteem. It creates a incredibly high level of, but now you mix that self-esteem with Black culture that's so about confidence. Confidence is so inherent to Black culture that you now create this schism where somebody feels inherently insecure and they have a culture that tells them, well, you're supposed to appear inherently confident. It's this perfect recipe for somebody who is constantly faking confidence and feels like an imposter everywhere they are. And the people who will have the most exaggerated and need to prove themselves more than anybody are going to be the people who feel like they actually don't belong. So there's this constant low self-esteem that you feel, this constant needing to prove yourself. And it's like you really do see it sometimes with mixed people where they quote unquote act the blackest because of this constant need to prove that you're black. So that's just a thought I had in terms of like how belonging and not belonging is going to affect self-esteem. And then we think about self-actualization, right? Which is so important for so many things. So going back to your question about when I felt like I sort of belonged the most clear answer is when I was a kid, because you don't really think of yourself as um, a race until you're sort of told you are. I remember reading this paper where somebody said they grew up, they didn't realize they were black until they saw their first white person, um, and so on and so forth. So growing up where I grew up, even though I was mixed, I lived in a house with two really lighter skinned black people. So we all just felt the same, and we never really thought about what our inherent differences are. So I always felt like I belonged there. And I would say it wasn't until I left. Um, and then it's really interesting too, because I grew up after that, I lived in Bellflower, and my friends were mostly black, except for like two Mexican kids that were part of that as well too. And it's funny because if you ask my homie Jamie, who was Mexican, he thought he was black too. So we just all thought we were black, which is so funny. That's just all we thought about. But it wasn't ever a characteristic that defined how we related to each other. It was always like who did the better kickflips on a skateboard, who was more down to, go and do this daring thing, who had the cooler fucking shoes. It was always these like really random things. It wasn't necessarily race. And the older you got, the more that became divisive because the most I felt like I didn't belong was when I actually moved to Orange County. And I got around another race who actually deals with a lot of, I think, mixed identity disorder and deals with being on the lower rung of, social hierarchies, which is Mexican people. And I was surrounded. I didn't have a single black person in my vicinity. I went to all, pretty much all Mexican middle school. And, these sort of like hood Mexican Hispanic people took me in and I became friends with them. And through that time, I believed I was Hispanic up until I graduated and left to San Diego and got around a bunch of different races. But from middle school to like the end of high school, I honestly kind of went that whole time thinking I was Hispanic because I was always hanging around Hispanic people. I began to eat their food. I began to hang out with their families. I began to speak the language. I began to learn all the ins and outs. And the interesting thing is like when you're around older Hispanic people, they can be very racist in my experience. Some of the most racist people. But at that point in time, I thought I was Puerto Rican. Until I took my ancestry test, realized I wasn't. So they would always be like, "Oh, okay, you're Puerto Rican then." That's the thing that would point to. If you had just a drop of Latin blood, they'd be like, "That's what you are." So then everyone just started saying I was Puerto Rican. So I started believing I was fully Puerto Rican, and that's the only thing I wanted to identify as because my blackness was seen as impure or wrong. Um, and so at that point in time, I felt the weirdest sense of belonging through my Puerto Rican side that didn't even exist. So all that being said, I don't know if there was a clear time where I felt like I belonged more than when I was a kid. But it also made me understand that belonging and this concept of race is so, in a sense, unobjective. I thought I was Puerto Rican. Everyone thought I was Puerto Rican. Therefore, I belonged. I'm not
Mm,
Puerto Rican. There's nothing in my blood that relates to Hispanic blood. That was irrelevant to my belonging in that moment. It was all just a sense of subjective, agreed upon understanding upon who does and doesn't, who's in the in group and who's in the out group. It was very,
mm. And so from that point in your life when you left to UCSD, which now, I feel like a lot of these universities are kind of like a hodgepodge of you just see every type of person from all over the world in every country. Did you feel Puerto Rican when you were there? What was kind of that like awakening like there?
yeah, that was very interesting because um I can't remember when I got that ancestry test. It was really like mind-boggling when I couldn't find a drop of Hispanic in there. Truly, I was actually so mind blown. Like I wanted that so bad. And I've accepted that that's not me. I think a lot of my family actually still does think we're Puerto Rican. Who knows? Maybe culturally we are. But so San Diego was very interesting, and I think California is just so interesting in general for this. Really, one of the few places you can do this. Now I know this living in Kansas, but I was surrounded by Indians, Punjabi Puts. It's just crazy. So, and I would see all different types of, Indian people from, people who are Sikh and, people who are this, that, you being Tamil. And I got to understand so much about Indian culture. And then I, began hanging out with a lot of Asian people too, my girlfriend being Filipino and Asian, where I got such a deep understanding of that. Watching anime, I got super into Japanese culture and all that good stuff. Um, and so I feel like my mind then in that moment became so expanded on what does it mean to be Asian? And what is that like? And just being, and so I got so entrenched in, I feel like Indian culture and like just straight up Asian culture in general. Um, and I am 2% Filipino, I found out. Um, my identity in that point in time, honestly, sort of really moved towards this understanding that who I am is in a beautiful sense just like what my race literally is composed of. It's actually composed of so many different things, like 30 different things in my ancestry. I'm a total collection of all of these races, just like I'm a total collection of all of these experiences. And
Mm,
now in this point in time, I don't really relate to people through race. I relate to people through like culture. And I relate to people through what their culture means to them and what my culture means to me. And my culture isn't just Black culture. My culture is a collection of all the cultures I've got to experience. And just like some could call Drake a culture vulture, I believe that I'm actually a great appreciator of all the cultures I've got to experience. And once I've experienced all these different flavors of culture, I've got to really understand the expansiveness of what it means to be a human, how beautiful each culture really is, and why would I ever want to be limited to one culture? And I don't think that there's anything that should limit us as long as you are truly appreciative of what that culture has to offer. And so many, races and cultures limit themselves by believing that because they're a part of an in group, that's who they are. And I feel like my understanding of who I am now really does feel like a conglomeration of all of these cultures and all of these ideas that have made me who I am today. I have, a deep appreciation for Buddhism and Hinduism and meditate. I have a deep appreciation for Mexican music and food. And the simpatía culture that sort of flows to them, the Spanish speaking that I have and the appreciation I have for sort of like what, Mexicans bring to the US. And obviously being black and white, I have such deep appreciation for that, huge appreciation for the Filipino culture, Japanese culture that like, I'm getting Japanese things tattooed on me. Like, so I'm just so grateful for each of them. And I'm so blessed to have lived in a place where I've really got to just kind of walk through each door. And I feel like before I felt like I didn't belong in any of them. And now I built my identity to be that I belong in each of them, that I am a part of all of these different cultures in a different type of way. Maybe not directly, but through my genuine appreciation and close experience with the people of those cultures.
mm. So racially, you're for the streets. That's what you're saying?
I'm racially for the streets, bro. Like if I've been ran through by every culture, bro. Like that's all I can say. Every culture has ran through me, dog. Like I'm really trying to like obviously the more micro cultures I haven't experienced, but like I've been in it, man. Like,
Yeah.
like I've been in
Yeah.
the cultural brothel.
Yeah. You know, I'm connecting a lot of what you're saying. I think people will really be able to relate to a lot of your experiences. And I think it's very common for anyone who doesn't feel, I think you highlighted part of the in group, primarily because of their race. I'm trying to think about when I grew up. There was a certain level of like fascination with what it meant to not be Indian. And I think a lot of this was because you talked about the social hierarchy. And I think it has changed drastically now compared to where it was 2 decades ago, where the stereotypes that came with Indian were, being hairy, being smelly, being, you can go through the list where none of them were really like, none of them were really great kind of stereotypes to be had. And so you develop this kind of disgust with your who you really are, with what it means to be Indian, which I still find so saddening. And many people told me that back then too, but at that point I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. That they told me that at some point you're gonna grow up and want to understand your culture and fall in love with it again. And I just didn't think that would happen because I felt this deep sense of disgust at being Indian. And so what ends up happening is because of that, you start to place your identity and desire to be something else. You place it on wanting to be white, you place it on wanting to be black, and you kind of put those up on a pedestal. So what you end up doing, I think, without even consciously thinking about it, is you end up kind of thinking that the world just revolves around this one race or this one kind of everything happens around being black or being white. And you try to build your entire life to being that. But the second you're able to like step out of your own shoes and you're able to travel and go to other places, you realize at the end of the day, there's so many different people. When you're in India, there's no concept of like, oh, Indians are like this, Indians are like that. You just are. And then when you're in Europe, people don't think of me as Indian. People think of me as American. Everyone was like, you're from the US. No one thought of me as somebody from India because of the way I speak, because of the way I think, and so many of these other reasons. And it then becomes something like what you were saying earlier, is that you start to realize there's no such thing as like any one race is better or worse than another, which I think is sometimes this like childish belief a lot of us have. And it's often entrenched even in dating practices and things like that, where people are like, we want to date people who look like us, not just because we think that, it's easier to relate or whatever. A lot of times it comes from a place of like we are superior. And this I think I can definitely speak to in many ways of just like my experience of the Indian culture. A lot of it is like we must push Indian practices forward because they are superior. And I think all of these tie down to those limited sorts of like narrow beliefs. Like, I mean, to really believe your culture in some way is superior, I feel like is a huge disservice to how much beauty and intellect there exists around the world and music and dance and languages. There's just too much richness. And so this ability to kind of like step out of your shoes and walk in all these different shoes, I think, is a really beautiful experience. And it's something that I think only happens when you're able to disassociate yourself from your own kind of connection to your race and to be able to be okay to take on the kind of role of another race. But I think that process itself is difficult. What are some of the things that you feel like helped you kind of get to the point where you're able to do that? Like, what was the first time you felt like, was it kind of just coincidental that you were placed in those environments where you were asked to do that, or was it something you feel like you consciously tried to do?
Hmm. Honestly, I feel like that was very, very beautifully said about having the sort of wherewithal to sort of step away and sort of really get a look at what else is out there. And um, I think so much of the people's perspectives on these things are literally from a lack of experience, like
Yeah.
truly a lack of experience. Like that's it. And where did it come from? I think we are so blessed to live in California. Like truly, we are so blessed to live in California. To look outside in any place and see such a combination of people. Even the restaurants you go to, dude, you can get, I went to fucking a coffee shop yesterday, and on one thing there was Thai tea ice cream and ube pandesal this. You have Filipino culture, you have Thai culture mixing together. There's horchata ice cream. Like every restaurant you go to around here has a fusion of different stuff, and that's really what California is. Like to me, it's the greatest place on earth because it's really a fusion of all the different races. It's a emergent property of all the different races that have come together. Like there's such beautiful culture brought here, and everyone does it so well. Like it's not badly done, like the terrible Mexican spot in Kansas or the terrible Asian spot. It's like people who are actually bringing the highest degree of the culture here. And most
Mm,
people here really do have an appreciation for multiple cultures. Like we've eaten the food, we've talked to the people, we've heard the language. Like it's crazy to me how many people in California just speak Spanish to some degree, pretty baseline. Versus when you go to Kansas, it's actually like most people do not know like the most basic Spanish words. Or like if you told somebody here, like, what is pad see ew from a Thai place? Most people would know. You talk about anything other than pad Thai, people out there that haven't even tried it. Like, I don't even know what pad Thai is. That's crazy. Like how much living in California means that you inherently appreciate other cultures. You just have
mm,
to. It's part of it unless you're really, regressive enough to limit yourself just to your culture. But I feel like I have such, I think mixed people are so beautiful of any kind because I think mixed people represent, this is going to be a hot statement, the next evolution of humanity. Like truly, I think that for so long, and I think our consciousness is continuously evolving as people. And so long, part of our more tribal animalistic consciousness had this arbitrary delineation of race. And in a lot of ways, it is really arbitrary. There's not a very agreed upon definition of what a race is, right? There's more genetic diversity between two people in similar points of Africa than there's between one person in Africa and one person in, Finland. The genetic diversity is greater amongst races. There okay, what part of India does makes you Indian? What skin color? What skin tone? What hair type? What makes you black particularly? Like it is so difficult to actually categorize what does it mean to be a race. It is a very rudimentary cosmetic assessment of what it means to be something. And it's a representation of what simple minds do in the sense of if you take a child, one sign of development is the ability to think outside of binaries. Children think in binaries because it's a more simple modality of thinking. Yes, no, black, white. Gray areas are extremely difficult to understand the more and more you progress. And so this understanding of you're either black, you're Indian, you're this, you're that, is a very, in my opinion, rudimentary way of understanding the world. But the more we delve into what race is or what this is or what that is, it's really hard to come up with a definition that actually connects you. And it's a very limited understanding of how you can relate to a human. Why pick race, right? We're connected by so many things. At most, we're all 50th cousins genetically. We're all cousins. We're all related. We all exist on Earth. We all exist here. We could all be connected by our love of Kendrick Lamar. We could all be connected by the fact that we all have vision. We could all be connected by the fact that we all love tostadas. I don't know. There's so many things people could pick. And
Mm,
race, to me, seems as arbitrary as anything else. And so, in my understanding, I think mixed people really represent a movement away from that dichotomous thinking, a movement towards, well, now you're not this or that. And now my understanding, if you are mixed, inherently the person, your parents had to, at some extent, appreciate something about that other race and understand it.
mm,
And if they're together, then that means that they've now blended races to some degree. And so that line gets really misskewed between what is one race or the other. And at some point in time, people estimate that everyone's going to be mixed. And I do believe that mixed people really do represent the next evolution of what it means to be a human and will eventually get rid of what it means to be a race. And we will now have to come up with other delineations for what it means to classify each other. But I do think this understanding of one race or another is truly just a simplistic way of understanding the world that people use to understand themselves that we don't need.
mm. Wow. I'm kind of just thinking about the fact that, dang, are we really 50th cousins? That's crazy. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, it's wild. There was just
At
a few,
most, we could be
yeah.
more. We really could be more. And genetically, we're all extremely fucking similar.
Mm,
Like, dude, what a race is so like complex, like genuinely. Like the closest theory I've seen is it's like from a minimalist theory of race. It's a phenotypic expression mixed with a geographic connection to one area in a culture that's related to it. It tries to mix all these things together. And it's like, all right, maybe, sure. But it still doesn't give us a very clear account of what it means to be a race.
mm,
So you can, I think it makes more sense to be, what does it mean to be a culture? What does it mean to be this? What it means to be that? But dude, we're all so connected. Like, why can't people be connected to the fact that like we're all second, children of someone. You're the oldest person. Like, I don't know. So I've always found that
yeah.
the people I connect most with are people who honestly are more bound by culture. And I think that's something that people in California all really share because there's so many mixings of race. I feel like culture becomes a thing that really connects us.
Mm. I think, wow. When I reflect on race and my kind of upbringing, thinking about race and reflecting on, if I was to use the word racist ideologies that I had for so much of my life and what it took for me to actually, like, I think to some extent move past them. I think like our friendship is a phenomenal one for me to think about because, and I always remember having a really profound moment where there was a time where you no longer were my black friend, but my friend who was black. Like that change was the most profound thing that had happened to me, right? Where like your race no longer preceded your humanity. Like your humanity way preceded your race. And it was shocking to me how long it took in my life to get to that point. And it was because I was so accustomed and taught to racialize everything, right? I mean, Pakistani versus Indian, white versus black, like American versus Indian. I mean, all of these things, that's how I was that was the lens in which I was looking through people, not to actually connect. And philosophy changed my life because I then realized, oh, we're all thinking about the same thing. Every human on this planet is thinking about what is a good life. They're thinking about what happens when we die. They're thinking about, am I a good person? Everyone's thinking about these things. And so when I started thinking about the world through that lens, then I realized, oh, we're all the same. There is no such thing that the same way you're saying you can use race to connect, but you can also use what are the things that you're thinking about, which I think then connect all humans. And so I felt like when I was able to kind of have that and realize how similar we are as opposed to different, then all of a sudden these boundaries started to quickly fall away. And now it's no longer, and I think in doing that you start to also fall in love with your own kind of being and your own identity. So that's kind of my next question for you, which is what has the process been like for you to fall in love with being mixed? And let's say it's not even done rationally, of being like, as you said earlier, like this is, in some ways like better or whatever, separate from like the rationality of falling in love. Like, what is your journey been like falling in love with your skin or falling in love with like who you are just in essence, in isolation of just yourself?
Hmm. I mean, I think that's such a uh, beautiful and complex question. And I believe that we sort of live in a culture that tries to really push us into labeling ourselves in a particular domain so that we can fit in a category of moral value. And that's a really interesting thing I think about labels is that the real reason why people want them is so that they can ascribe a sense of morality easier as a sense of understanding.
Mm,
You know, if you can ascribe a moral value to someone instantly, you sort of you get them in a way, you can control in a way, you can understand in a way that's a lot easier than the true nature of human beings, which is that there is
mm.
external quality that you can pick from that will internally reflect who someone really is. And so he's
Wow.
dancing on screen. He's hyping me up right now.
Oh, nice.
And that's that's what it really comes down to with the whole debate, right? Like the whole the bell curve book that was written and was very, very controversial about being able to ascribe IQ points to different types of races and different moral qualities to different types of, black people are more aggressive, people are more this, people are more that. And that's the whole debate, right? How do we ascribe moral value? Is it through socialization, through the experiences that we've had from growing up, or is it through these inherent qualities that the genes provide us? And I'm sure to some extent the answer is both, but I do not believe it's simple enough to pick anyone and be able to confidently predict who someone is going to be. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to predict who are you from an aesthetic quality that to me comes down to a degree of probably some kind of Darwinian trait that's been passed on from time to time of trying to figure the other person out for a means of protection. The real game is getting to understand somebody at a deeper level that is beyond just the aesthetics, using the aesthetics to inform an understanding of another person, but not using the aesthetics as the baseline label that you build upon from understanding another individual. Because if we weren't forced to be put into these labels, then people would have to one think for themselves, people would have to choose for themselves, and people would have to relate to themselves in a way that was unique and original. And that's the thing that
Wow.
being mixed has made me have to do. I've been forced out of labels because I don't have one. So I've had to independently build an identity that has allowed me to love myself and has allowed me to relate to the world and through experiences. And one of the beautiful things philosophy has given me is more than anything, I relate to myself as a philosopher. I relate to the world as a philosopher. I relate to understanding as a questioner, as a thinker, as somebody who's constantly looking for answers in this unanswerless world, somebody seeking meaning and a great life and happiness. And that's not to say, I feel like someone could be listening to this and be like, oh, so you're saying race doesn't exist. That's not what I'm saying at all. You're saying race doesn't matter to you. That's not what I'm saying at all either. I'm saying race informs our identity, but it doesn't form our identity. I'll say that one more time. It informs our identity, but it doesn't form our identity. And to me, that's important. Bars are us?
Oh my, what is happening? I feel like where am I? What on earth is happening? Oh my God, dude. Oh, you're like, wow. This idea of like easy moral placement is so profound because it was something I was thinking about recently, actually, where a grandma, I walked into the room and I had a big beard, I have a crazy hairdo, I look insane. And immediately she's like, "What are you doing? You look crazy. Like, I expected a different person. Who are you?" And immediately in my head, I was like the bad person. Then she learned about me teaching and we talked for a few days. And then she was like, "You're actually such a great person, this and that." But in that moment, what I realized is that anyone who labels you as good really quickly can flip-flop and call you bad even quicker. And so in the same way, if someone labels you bad in the second of one day or one week, even quicker than that, they can label you good. Like the ability to actually call somebody good or bad that quickly, all it shows is like a lack of depth in like their ability to actually think about what is good and what is bad. And I
Damn.
feel like what you're talking about here is exactly that. If someone's like, "Oh, you like I've seen so many examples of this. Like, "Oh my God, you speak your language at home. You are a good person." Oh, like you actually like listen to what your parents say and you're a good person. It's so easy because I think but I never actually pinpointed it to what you're saying, which is we have this desire to figure out whether someone is good or bad really quickly. And we want to do that. We want to be like, this is a good person, this is a bad person. And we choose rather than the difficult nature of actually getting to learn the complexity of someone using things like do they have tattoos, like what is their hairstyle, like what is their job. We use all these other labels to like take away from the difficult process of figuring out whether someone is good or bad. That's such a great point.
Exactly. I think it's like I said, I think it's a evolutionarily chosen mechanism that makes sense, right? You can quickly ascribe qualities and you can make judgments from those qualities for survival. What does a fucking cheetah look like? It has spots and it, has this like golden fur. Okay, quickly, I need to be able to deduce using, Daniel Kahneman, ascribes two different types of thinking. There's type one thinking and type two thinking. Type one thinking is slow, deliberate. It's a completely different process, more prefrontal cortex activated. Type two thinking, it's quick. It's very amygdala focused. It needs to be able to happen in a second so that you can survive. It's not consciously mediated. Too many people operate off of type 2 thinking in every single system of their life, which is I'm here for survival. And they use that type 2 thinking to be the front mediator of everything that happens in their life. This is how I quickly am judging somebody. But the thing is, sure, do the type 2 thinking. It's survivally oriented, but always move towards the type 1 thinking. Always go from type 2 to type 1, the slow, deliberate, let me actually get to understand this person. And it's funny, you're totally right. It's exactly what my mom does as well, too. I remember when I told her I was dating Filipino. Oh, Filipinos, yeah, those are good people. Like I work with a lot of them. Like they're very sweet, has now ascribed moral characteristics that this person has based off of what? What is the gene that would produce that quality? Please fucking tell me. Like, is it G1 2 2 3 4 6? Like, where's the, let me see the polygenic score that would relate to how this person would be that particular type of, because we don't know. We have no clue. We don't even have the ability to examine the genome enough to get, accurate cause effect characteristics of what a gene would mean. So how the hell is your very basic, cosmetic assessment of another person going to be revealing of what that person is or isn't on the inside? And really, like I said before, I think it's a really rudimentary style of thinking that reflects an older um, presence of consciousness that we're moving away from and understanding. And here's one more last thing I'll say. Ultimately, Sartre said that every human is terrified of their freedom. Every human is trying to give their freedom away because it's the most terrifying thing you could do. We are constantly looking for paths to be drawn to us. We're constantly looking to have answers given to us in this answerless world, right? And so we ascribe to systems that tell us what we are and what we aren't, and how to live our life and how to not live our life. We ascribe to religions that say this is how you live life. It's very easy to ascribe yourself to a race and say, this is who I am because this is what it's always been. This is what it means to be black. This is what it means to be white. I don't have to independently develop characteristics that I have to come up with from my own will because this is the path that's always been laid to me. This is what it means to be this race, and I will follow suit. It's a lot more difficult to independently say, I'm going to come up with a new definition of what it means to be black. I'm going to come up with a new definition of what it means to be white. And I think that for our understanding, it's a lot easier to have characteristics ascribed to. Like you said, Indians are this, Indian, but when you go there, there's no clear picture of what an Indian is and isn't. Same thing amongst black people, bro. There's so many different shades and colors and personalities of black people, but truly, we give away our freedom by following a set of patterns of behaviors of understanding that has already been set forth for us. I think so much of us being a race is just our fear of our freedom, that we aren't really anything.
Hmm. To kind of connect this to education, like one of my final questions for you is to understand. How is it that when we think about, being socialized to understand race, to even like, look at ourselves in the mirror for the first time and be like, I am Indian, which you mentioned, it doesn't happen when you're born. It takes quite some time until you realize yourself as a racialized being. If you were to have children or teach a classroom and topics in nature, topics of race come up, what is how would you go about it? I mean, it's a complex question, but how would you go about kind of introducing race to your loved ones, perhaps in the future? That may be a little different than the way you do it. You've seen it yourself.
Hmm. Damn, that is a tough question. I feel like all these things are so much easier spoken about for me in the sphere of ideas, but when they come down to actual practical, practice, they get so much more complex. I feel like for me, I think an important aspect of how I want to, raise my kids or the people in my life, whatever, is to really have them experience the full breadth of anything. When I'm, having my child choose what religion they want to be or whatever, it only makes sense to me to introduce them to Hinduism, to Buddhism, to Sikhism, to, Judaism, to all of these things. And then have them really understand what Black culture has been informed by and what, race he comes from and how that religion has played such an integral part in our race. But ultimately they get to choose what they want to be. And same thing with race. I think it'll be very important to understand them, how to have them understand how the world is going to see them, what roots they came from, and how many beautiful aspects of other races there are. And truly for me, I'll close with this concept that, has been very, I think, important for me. And I think if people can walk away with anything of value, it might be this, which there's someone named Peter Singer, very controversial figure in philosophy, but he has a concept called the concept of moral concern, circle of moral concern. And what he says, and there's research done on this, which is that dependent upon the group which we identify with, that is the group that we will have a sense of moral concern for.
Mm,
Something that a lot of, nasty politicians utilize quite well, and it's actually a form of control, is the very limited understanding that people have of their moral concern. People will take a group and then they'll say, these are the out group. This is the out group. They're different. They're separate from us. They are dangerous. And the second you perceive someone as your out group, you become more hostile towards them. You become more aggressive. And there's even parts of the brain that relate to how more aggressive it will be. Like dependent upon the level of oxytocin you have, you'll be more loving to your in group, but more aggressive to the out group. So that it has genetic and biological components to it. But what they've tested is that the concept of in group and out group is purely a cognitive schema that we have created to understand the world, and you can expand that concept of moral concern to something greater. It's really based upon an arbitrary quality. You don't need much. They've done studies where they say this group is the green shoes, this group is the blue shoes.
yeah.
Let's see who's, and people, their brain will say, I'm green shoes, right? Because that's your evolutionary thing. But the evolution of consciousness is constantly understanding that we're moving away from our biological drives and impulses. That's what it means to be a human. So your biological impulse is to have concern for a group that's very limited. But you can choose to have concern for groups that are greater than you. And for me, something you and I relate on is this, concern for people who are, you could say I have concern for humans as a whole. You could say I have concerns for people who are lost and wondering how to figure themselves out in the world. I have a concern for people who don't know who they are between a race. I have concern for everybody dealing with mental health issues and depression. These are my people because I understand them. If you're a depressed person or if you've experienced anxiety, I understand you. And that's what relates us. Because often the experiences that we truly relate to, there's no clear experience of what it means to be Black or Indian, but there is a clear experience of what it means to be heartbroken. There's a clear experience of what it means to be depressed. There's a clear experience of what it means to eat a beautiful, piece of food or look at an ocean. And these are things that we really relate through, conscious by conscious experience. And so I think that having an expanded circle of moral concern is what I want the people in my life to understand. We are this race, and we are connected by so much more than just these qualities, and this is how we relate to the people around us. The person around you suffers, the person around you is confused, the person around you experiences pain. That is so much more of who you are than simply this, kind of arbitrary label that you've been given. So that's what I'd say.
Wow. I have spoken to a lot of people who have, who've been around on the planet for 65, 70, 80 years. But your ability to articulate and have all of these like profound wisdoms before you even hit 30 is I'm wow. I mean, this was such I can't wait to listen to this in the future and just like think back to I can't believe we actually, you shared some of those things at such a young age. I mean, it's fascinating, dude. Like this is not an easy task at all. I feel like you have such a refreshing and profound understanding of race and like what it has meant to you. And before we started this conversation, you're like, I don't really know if I know what to say. I mean, all that you have said, truly, I'm genuinely shocked. I feel like normally yeah, wow.
Thank you very much. And honestly, you've done a incredible job of asking questions that pull it out and just being a space to hold all this. And it's a reflection of your inherent curiosity and your inherent non-judgment and your inherent not putting something onto me that gives me the sort of safety and the comfortability to speak from a perspective of my humanity rather than from anything you need me to be. And I would really encourage people in the future to find friends who don't try to put them on any side of a binary or a dichotomy, but really see them in their wholeness and their completeness and their complexity like you do as a friend too. So much of this is just a reflection of the belonging that I feel with you as a friend. So
Damn.
yeah.
Oh, that's hella sweet. That's actually sweet. I really like I want to think more about this idea of belonging and fitting in. I think it's a really important distinction. And I hope to one day feel like I belong. That seems like a beautiful thing to aim towards. But I want to say really thank you for being on. I'm excited. You're gonna be on at least 100 more times throughout our lifetime. So I'm really excited to kind of continue this process going. But thank you for your time.
Re-educated podcast. Oh,
And so you've started recently this movie TikTok, which has been doing phenomenal. Can you shout out the at name for it, please?
oh yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in movies and you're interested in psychology, I run a TikTok, Mylon in the Mind, at Mylon in the Mind. And yeah, we just review, not we, I review different topics, different movies, and I try to teach psychology concepts through the medium of these movies. So if you're interested, yeah, shoot me a follow.
Yeah, and it's great work, and you record and post weekly most times except finals week. But
Yeah,
outside of finals week, I mean, just yeah, great content, and it takes a lot of effort, and I'm also really excited to see that project grow.
thank you.
Re-educated X Mylon in the Mind collaboration coming soon towards a city near you. But thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I will post a link to Mylon's TikTok and also some of his like social pages if you're interested in learning more. And as per usual, stay re-educated.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.